My name is Steve Hernandez, and I'm the Executive Director of the Legislature's Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity. We are here tonight to have a really dynamic discussion, and I'm so excited to be joined by the panelists that you are about to meet. I want to say that we are on Facebook Live for the benefit of those of you who are watching this live. Please share this broadcast. We are also will be broadcasting on CTN, either live or as a rebroadcast. And finally, the video will also be available on Facebook for later viewing. Again, my name is Steve Hernandez, and we're here today to continue our series on Nothing for Us, informally called Nothing for Us Without Us, and Nothing About Us Without Us. The name of today's series is Our Story is Our Strength, the power of truth-telling in confronting trauma, COVID, and beyond. As I said, I'm joined by a star-studded panel of leaders and thinkers in the field, in various fields actually. And what I will do next is I think I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves just so that we can get a flavor of what the conversation will be. I'm going to start in the order that I see each of you in my Brady Bunch panel, and I'll start with Nelva Marquez Green. Welcome, Nelva.
Thank you, and thank you for having me alongside these amazing panelists. My name is Nelva Marquez Green, and I am founder and executive director of the Anna Grace Project. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist and director of community advancement at Central Connecticut State University.
Welcome, Nelva. Next on my screen, I see Alice Forster. Welcome, Alice.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and hi, Nelva. I'm Alice Forster. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Clifford Beers Clinic, which is a child and family mental health clinic in Greater New Haven region. And I am also on the Anna Grace Project on their board of directors. And on the Connecticut Violence Intervention Program board.
Thank you, Alice. Dr. Maisa Akbar, it's so wonderful to see you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Dr. Maisa Akbar, I have several hats and roles that I play. I'll try to condense them a little bit for the purposes of this conversation. I am the author of a book called Urban Trauma, A Legacy of Racism, which captures the framework of race-based trauma through the lens of both historical, biological, and environmental ways that we experience race-based trauma. I'm also the CEO and founder of Integrated Wellness Group, which is a behavioral health clinic here in New Haven, Connecticut. And I represent the American Psychological Association at the United Nations and do a lot of global work in terms of informing psychology on the global landscape.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar. It's a pleasure to have you. Dina Simmons, welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm just so excited to be in company with everyone here. Like, I just want to have I can't wait to start talking. Anyway, I'm Dina Simmons. I am the Assistant Director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and faculty at the Yale Child Study Center. I see you at meetings, Dr. Maisa. And I work really at the intersection of social emotional learning and culturally responsive practices, equity, and liberation. I am the author of the forthcoming book called White Rules for Black People. I'm excited to be here and to talk about how we've been existing in this space, especially me as a woman of color, so that we can tell our truth, because through our truth, we can be free.
Thank you, Dina. And now I'm going to turn next to our leaders, our state leaders on the panel, Senator Gary Winfield and Representative Robin Porter. I have to say, I really want to thank you firstly for your energy in getting this dream team together. These are difficult times, they are emergent times, and now more than ever, really having these truthful, honest conversations together and sharing them publicly is so critical. Senator Winfield, welcome.
Thank you. First, I want to say Dina just gave me a book I have to go buy now. I am very happy to be here tonight. This is a part of a series of conversations in which we are having conversations about the community, but the people having the conversations look like the communities that are being spoken about. And I think that's important. I want to thank you, Stephen, and the commission for helping us to do this. My name is Senator Gary Winfield. I represent West Haven and New Haven. And during the pandemic that we're experiencing, the role that some of us are playing is to elevate conversations with academics, healthcare professionals, and others who actually can speak from experience about what is happening inside of communities. So I'm excited about where this conversation is going tonight, and I think it'll be a blast.
Thank you. Representative Porter, welcome.
Hello, Stephen. Thank you so much for partnering with us to get this done. Senator Winfield and our esteemed panelists, it is a tremendous honor. I'm truly humbled to be sitting with you all tonight. As the good senator said, you know, these are hard times for everyone, but even harder times for communities of color. We are being disproportionately impacted during COVID, but absolutely pre-COVID as well. And I'm hoping that we will take this opportunity and this platform and where we currently sit in this pandemic as an opportunity to bring the people that are closest to the problems so that they can help us with the solutions, real solutions that are going to be tangible and that can be felt by the people that are deeply impacted by what we're seeing. And I'm excited that we have some folks here that I know have no shame in telling the truth. So let's get started.
Thank you so much. So I'd really like to start with a little bit of a invite from each of you, just a little bit of a dissertation, but not as long as one, on how are you feeling, what are you seeing, and why is this conversation important to you? And I'd like to start with Dr. Maisa Akbar. How are you feeling, what are you seeing, and why is truth-telling so critical?
How am I feeling? It's funny because I think that changes like on a daily basis. Some days I'm like, okay, I am somehow adjusting to like this new version of normal, which changes daily. And then some days my anxiety is up the roof. And then every time I'm looking at social media or I turn on the television and I'm seeing the stark realities of communities of color, my community being impacted by COVID, I go through like the cycle of grief. I'm angry, then I get emotional. I don't know that I quite can accept, you know, some of the issues that are going on. And at the same time, I'm trying to manage, you know, being a mom, and a wife and also a business owner. So it's really been challenging. And I think about, you know, that despite those challenges, I still have a level of privilege because I can get on Zoom and I can work and I can do these other things that a lot of the folks in my community are unable to do, are really, really struggling. I am beyond excited about this idea of truth telling because I believe and I feel and I've talked about for years that in many ways we are silenced. And, you know, there are more opportunities now than ever for the trailblazers in our community to be able to come forward to speak truth about what has been happening in our communities and to make sure that we are at the forefront of what change needs to look like. That is so important. We have to be able to change the narrative and to dictate the way that narrative is going to look here from this point forward into the future. So those are my my thoughts, my initial thoughts at least. I'm sure I have a whole lot more to say, but initially I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Akbar. Dina, I pose the same question to you. How are you feeling? What are you seeing, and why is this conversation important to you?
So I'm similar to Dr. Akbar, which is I go through a range of emotions every day. Rage is probably one of the ones that is probably most prominent for me, to be honest. I think about historical decisions and policies and laws that were created to only heighten what we've already been saying. We have been telling our truth for a very long time, and we have been ignored. And so now that we have data that says that there are racial health disparities that is related to COVID-19, it has nothing to do with biological. When you go to Waterbury, when you go to Bridgeport and you see communities, New Haven, for example, where people live in more dense communities, they don't have the privilege of physical distancing, right? So it's hard for me to not be in this constant state of rage. But it's all about how I'm going to manage that rage, right? How am I going to not live in this space of rage and do some advocacy and activism in that space? So that's something I'm always dealing with. I've also experienced some loss because of COVID-19, right? I'm a Black woman, so of course I'm and I'm from the Bronx, live in Waterbury, and of course there's going to be a connection to someone who I've lost. So there's sadness as well. So I'm just going through a range of emotions, and I'm doing a lot of self-care and supporting other people with self-care, because there's such a thing called helper's high, so that I can also, through helping people, I'm healing. But I think that, again, what it comes down to is, as a country, we've decided time and time again who gets to live and who gets to die. And we see it now heightened in full big text, that we know who we value. And historically, it has not been people of color, it has not been Indigenous people, it has not been Black people. So that anger, it drives my work, it drives my writing, it drives everything I do, so that we can do something about this. I'm excited to be in conversation with everyone today. So I can't wait.
Thank you, Dina. Dr. Forrester, Alice Forrester.
My son just poked his head in. I think I echo everything that Dr. Maisa and Dina said, that it's how am I feeling? I feel sometimes extraordinarily numb. We had to basically turn around a business with 200 folks to go into a telehealth, a telemedicine model within 5 days. And working from home and doing all of that has been, as Maisa said, an extreme privilege. But it's also been really amazing to see folks being able to make a change on in a quick time. Personally, as a lesbian family, 2 moms and 3 children adopted through DCF, who are biracial, Native American and African American. In particular, my daughter, who's 21, I'm terrified for her because she hasn't quarantined, and she thinks she has because she sees the same group of 3 or 4 people, but she has got a car and she's out about, and she's really, a great kid, but she thinks she's doing what's right, and it's hard to get through to her and tell her, you need to stay home, which is painful for a 21-year-old to have to stay home. So I've been, terrified for her in some ways, and so that there's a lot of it's easy to be caught up in work, but feeling very personally. What we're seeing is an incredible injustice in terms of education. My kids go to New Haven Public Schools and they get papers to fill out every day, whereas in Cheshire, I think somebody tells me, I think, their kid goes to school and is online all day, so the difference is kind of intense and difficult. And I think this conversation is very important, as a white woman, and really knowing how in a privileged position I am, to be even talking on this panel. I think what was said earlier is, we have for hundreds and hundreds of years repeated this over and over again. And frankly, I think there has been a spotlight, but I'm really worried. I saw it and then it went out. And people don't want to talk about it, and they just like to kind of change the subject. And I'm afraid so I'm excited that you're going to keep the spotlight on. So that's how I am. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Welcome, Nelba.
On the day we were sent home, I was actually at work in New Britain, but I had driven off campus to go get something at a gas station, and we received an emergency 911 call letting us know that there was possible exposure on the campus of Central Connecticut State University, and we were all to go home in an emergency. And on December 14th, I was also in New Britain working and received a 911 emergency reverse call. What I'm feeling is that this feels very familiar. And what it's reminiscent of or reminds me of for families is that many of our families aren't just going through COVID, but they have exposure and experience to multiple traumas. And that can both lessen our resolve, but also force us to dig in to those things which have allowed us to survive previous events. So what I'm feeling is a sense of familiarity. What I'm feeling is a great sense of loss and grief. Again, here we are again. I was sitting in a firehouse on December 14th, and now what I see all around me is so many families sitting in that same firehouse, waiting to hear if they have a next paycheck, waiting to hear if their loved ones are going to come home safe, because we can say stay home, but we know that some families can't stay home. And it is incredibly flippant how we speak about and to certain families with some of our safety rules, even access to masks and personal protective equipment. So it is a bit of rage, a lot of grief, and again, recognizing my own privilege, having grown up in Hartford and living in Newtown, knowing that if I need something, I might have access to it just based on zip code. I also see a lot of parallels between how we're handling the pandemic and how we handle gun violence. We have decided that in some zip codes, it's okay if people die. We will care less if people die there. But if people die over there, then that becomes a story. So that's the part that's incredibly hurtful and enraging to me, that we have been here before. It hasn't been a pandemic, but we're here all the time with different things. So I'm also incredibly concerned about the disinformation campaign. One of the things we see with every tragedy now is there are intentional efforts to keep people from solid science-based information. And we are seeing it now from the highest levels of office. And we must fight back against the disinformation campaigns that are out there jeopardizing our families, jeopardizing our communities, in particular, saying it's okay to go back. I'm pretty much like, whatever the highest office says, I'm doing the opposite. So that's what I'm feeling. That's what I'm seeing. And this conversation is important because justice matters.
Thank you, Neva. I'm hearing the themes of rage, fear, grief, and it's compelling to me that you ended with the question about having good, reliable, consistent information based on what we know is true and based on science. I think so much of that fear is driven by what we don't know, and I wonder whether we are reaching all of our communities with that truthful, accurate, and reliable information. Robin, I want to turn to you. How are you feeling? What are you seeing? And why is it important to be truth-telling at this moment in our history?
Thank you for those questions, Steve. And I think my response is pretty much mirror what has already been said. It's been a mirage of emotion. I wake every morning in a spirit of joy, just for the simple fact that I was able to open my eyes. I try to hold on to that feeling to help me combat the grief, the anger, the sorrow, the rage that I know is coming day in and day out. So it fluctuates, and it's just as fluid as this pandemic and the circumstances in which we have to operate. That's how I see my emotions. So it comes and it goes, but I try to stay rooted and grounded in my faith, knowing that we are derived from ancestors who have come through a lot worse than this. And just standing on those shoulders gives me hope, tremendous hope, that not just conversations like this, but the actions that will derive from these conversations will propel us to the greatness that we. what I'm seeing is what makes me sad. It's what makes me angry. It grieves me. It's a belly ache. It's a heartache. But then it's what we have to deal with. As the chair of labor at the State House, I'm out a lot dealing with labor issues, worker rights issues, and I just really see what's happening with the workers that look like majority Black and brown. Reminiscent, it reminds me of slavery and plantation. And I say that because we're sending people out to do work that have been mandated to show up to work. While, as you said, now, but we tell some people, stay safe, stay home. That's not the option. And they don't get to stay home. And we're sending them out like they're sacrificial lambs, literally sheep being led to slaughter. And laws that are on the books that are not being enforced and adhered to, that further increases their lack of safety and protection on the job. I'm seeing people that are hungry. We're delivering food to workers. We're delivering to neighbors and elders. People are afraid. They are in a panic. They are anxious. Their mental health is deteriorating even further than what it was already, because we haven't discussed the urban trauma yet. But in the communities where this is being most impacted are communities pre-COVID that were barely hanging on, struggling to survive. So it's critical what I'm seeing. And I think the truth telling is free for once and for all. So that's why the truth telling piece is critical to me. We need to be able to stand in that truth and own that truth and live by that truth and model that truth, so that the ones that are coming behind us, the ones that came before us, and the ones that stand with us as allies understand what the real struggle is. And I'm so excited to have experience at the table, because I think that is what makes all the difference in the work that we do. We have to be doing the work through a lens of intimacy and experience, because then we understand the sense of urgency. And where help is really needed.
Thank you, Robin.
You're welcome.
Gary, how are you feeling? What are you seeing, and why is it important to tell the truth today?
Yeah, that's a heavy question, actually. I don't even know how you describe it. So we're supposed to be, at least myself and Robin and some others, we're supposed to be leaders, right? So do you want to do the unmasking to talk about what you really feel? For me, this is a very personal thing. I think, my wife is CNA. So every day she goes to work. She comes back into the home and we go through a dance, right? She strips down at the door. She does all of the things she's supposed to do, and she does basically a drop and roll into the shower because she doesn't want to bring the disease into the home. And what I've been listening to is the government talk about how everything is okay. There's some people who aren't okay, but it's a weird way of talking. It's like, that group of people that we're saying aren't okay are actually okay. It's weird. It's strange. It's frustrating. It's angering. And that's my personal issue. But in my workspace, I get to hear the issues of other people. And the people that I'm focused on are all people, because that's the job, but I'm focused most heavily on the people who aren't being heard because people refuse to listen, not because they don't have something to say. So when you think about what's happening in the prison systems, when you think about the nursing homes, as I've said, group homes, those places, those congregate care places, what has happened has not had to happen. But part of why it happens is because the people who are, and Stephen, you and I talked about this, who are doing the trade-off that happens, right? At what point do we decide it's cool to let that number of lives be the number of lives that we're going to lose so we can continue on with business? The people who are doing that are not the people who are on the wrong side of the coin. The people who are having those conversations are not the people who are on the wrong side of the coin. And what I'm concerned about, and part of the reason I'm so grateful for having this conversation, is I know that for certain communities, community level trauma is the norm. right? For other communities, it's not. It's why we didn't always have a framework for community level trauma, because you can just let those communities fall apart. And I know that with the advent of COVID, community level trauma will increase. And I know that that is passed down, it is transmissed to the next generation on and on. And I don't feel like I have the capacity to do anything about it. And so that to me is the reason why truth telling is important, because I think it creates a space in which people can, yes, commiserate, but also hear that there are people who understand. Because when we're separated, I think it's important that we use technology like we're using today so that people at least know that. As little as that is, it's a lot. And I'll in my initial comments there.
Dr. Akbar, I think as communities of color, we're used to hearing the words high risk when we are referred to, whether we are at high risk for certain diseases or conditions, high risk in terms of an investment, high risk when it comes to being justice involved, high risk to failing in school, and now we're high risk at contracting this disease. What does it mean to you when you hear that our community is high risk?
What it means to me is the perpetuation of structural racism. That's what it means to me. We've been positioned to be at high risk. It was by design. It has been by design. And we are consistently fighting a structure that has meant to keep us in this position, because the powers that be and the principles of white supremacy perpetuate the need to keep us, at high risk, and to keep us from being able to really live out our resilience. And yes, we are a resilient people, but gosh, there's only so much, that sometimes I'm just like, I'm tired of being resilient. Like I need a break. I need a break from being resilient. One of the things that I want to share as a result of this particular story, because I thought about this when you said high risk, is a phone call that I got about a week or two after the pandemic, after the shutdown, the shelter in place. I have a cousin that lives in Mass, in the Dorchester area. I'm originally from Brooklyn, so Dina, I'm a Brooklyn girl, and my family immigrated from the Dominican Republic. And my cousin calls me because my aunt and my uncle, who are in their 80s, seemed very sick, and they couldn't have access to COVID testing, nowhere. They are mostly Spanish speaking, so they couldn't really express some of the symptomatology to the medical professions. And what was happening is that they were getting sicker and sicker, and they were in the at-risk range and the high-risk range because of many pre-existing conditions. And she didn't know what to do. So I said to her, as she's sobbing in tears, get them in the car and take them to the nearest ER. And when you get there, whichever nurse or doctor meets you at the door, put them on the phone with me. And through that conversation, I was able to get both my aunt and uncle, who both tested positive, admitted, and my aunt on a ventilator because her breathing was sub 50%. And I thought about the idea that if they didn't have me as a family member, a doctor, of course, and what I had to say immediately is, I'm Dr. Akbar, assistant clinical professor at Yale, because nothing else was going to work at that moment, right? So I had to pull every possible credential that I had to get the attending to talk to me and to take me seriously. How many people in communities of color have a Misa or a Dina or an Elba or an Alice that they can call and say, I need you to please make sure that my family member gets admitted and gets the help and the treatment that they need so that they can survive this disease? And that was really painful to see. And I had to be extremely assertive in my advocacy of them not just being admitted, but every day having a phone call so that I can monitor how their health was faring. And it's just devastating to have to be in that position. And it was devastating for my aunt and uncle, who, thank goodness, were discharged and are comfortably at home right now. but I sit with that, and I sit with the idea that so many of us in our communities, as these statistics, you know, and these numbers come out, and I think every one of these numbers, every one of these statistics is a loved one. It's a person that someone lost and weren't even able to see. They can't be there with them. They can't hold them. They can't tell them it's going to be all right. And when they die, they can't even bury them. That's what I'm seeing. Not just the disproportionality, not just the numbers and the statistics, but the pain that continues to hover over our communities, that goes undealt with, and that this idea of COVID is just compound trauma and complex trauma and collective trauma, that sometimes becomes overwhelming in terms of how we're going to be able to move forward. And that's my truth telling right now.
Dr. Akbar, it's so powerful, especially when you frame it, in terms of access and, the microcosm, the language access. There are those of us who are Latinos remember that moment where us being able to translate for our parents meant the moment in which either a parent would be helped or a parent would have access to a vital service. And, so the exposure, the rush to become an adult or at least learn about adult things happens very early in our communities. And Dr. Forrester, I know you've worked a lot in the field of adverse early childhood experiences, several of you have. I wonder, tell me about the role of ACEs in really some of what we're seeing in our communities.
I think that, it was about 13 years ago when we started to really look from a trauma lens at the clinic. Medical profession so nicely puts people into diagnostic categories and neatly pile them. Oh, they have this diagnosis. And, also around behavioral health, or behaviors in kids, we begin to look at them as, having behaviors, meaning, self, that they're bad kids or, whatever. And so when we began to really look at, and ask the question, I wonder what happened to this kid. I wonder what's happening in this family. One of the programs we had, we treated young youth who had problem sexual behavior. And we also treated the victim, in another program, and really for the first time began to bring everybody together and say what's going on and how is this impacting the life and what's going on in the kids. That was really a turnaround for our agency. Adversity. The thing that bugs me a little bit about ACEs is that as if you can count something. Right? We're talking about like how many ACEs. Well, you know what? You could be talking about a list, how many different kinds of things you have, but you don't talk about the chronicity of it, right? A kid could have 3 ACEs and, adverse childhood experiences, divorce, parental loss, or domestic violence. And then you could have a kid who has that and has had that for, 10, 15 years. So, when we're in the schools in particular and working with our kids, our job is to not only understand that this child that human beings are changed by experiences, and these experiences are human. They're not, that this is humanity right now, and that we have to be present and be with the folks who have had experiences rather than trying to change it or augment it. And another thing that we try to do is to train the staff to see things from a different perspective. And, my experience, I often tell, is this little kid whose father was murdered on the street in front of him when he was in New York. And he kept running out of the school. I mean, they were ready to expel him. He was in kindergarten. And, they didn't understand. And so I went in and explained, well, Dad, every time a fire truck goes by or a police car, he's triggered and he runs out to see if he's okay, if they're okay. And that realization changed this kid's life. The teacher was like, okay, every time that she became conscious of the fire and would go to the window with him and look out, and, then they would be able to go back to, and sit down. So it's really about being able to be with the kids and understand, that these experiences have large impact on how the biology in the brain is built. And I just, I think that Folletti once said, I heard Dr. Folletti was one of the authors of the study say, I've been talking about this for like 20 years and nobody's done anything about it. And people are talking about it, but we're only at the tip of the iceberg in terms of really understanding. And there's a lot that has to change.
And that change requires a commitment, right? And a commitment at every level, I think, to not only to resource, but to see communities that you are working with as assets. And I wonder, Nelva, there was very recently in the last few years, there have been conversations about, when we work in the early childhood field, we understand the importance of developing executive function. But there was a conversation that started a few years ago that started considering, very well-meaningly, I think, the executive function capability of adults. And really what they were talking about is adults of color. And what was so exasperating about that conversation is that it treated the people of color who are experiencing stress, who are experiencing a lack of resource and experiencing a lack of opportunity as if they had something wrong with them. So can you talk a little bit about that? What are you seeing in the field in terms of that thinking?
Sorry, I was listening just so intensely to all of your testimonies, and I have to go back to something Dr. Akbar said, and that is my humanity is on trial as a woman of color daily. That story of having to be the advocate at the hospital. What message do we send to Black mothers when they're more likely to die during childbirth than any other mom? What message do we send to victims of the crack cocaine epidemic or the war on drugs policies when we meet the opioid crisis victims with a bit more compassion than we did the rest? What message do we send to gun violence victims in New Haven, Waterbury, Bridgeport, Hartford, when there are mothers who've had their children die just like mine, but I got a park in anywhere I wanted? And it's the dehumanization that we also, it's not just the COVID, it's not just it's the fundamental message daily that your life doesn't matter as much as and that for me is the thing that keeps me up at night, because it makes my work the work of having to breathe life or remind people while I'm trying to put the oxygen mask on myself and remind myself that my life matters too. So, to these systems that someone else said, these are systems by design. So of course we're going to look at people, executive functioning and people of color as pathological. We're going to find pathology because the system was designed to find pathology in us. But it is this dehumanization that I think is a great battle that we don't talk about very often. We talk about other things, but that is something I see that we need to breathe compassion and life back into people and keep holding people accountable for their behavior when they do it and they're a part of this system, which not only does it, but encourages it, needs it, survives on it.
Dina, thank you for that, Nelva. And Dina, as I think about, some of the dynamics, even on this call, I wonder, what can we do as a people with this rage? What can we do with this fear? For so long, it's almost as if all that we can do is wait. But what can we do, Dina?
So I first have to respond to everything that has been said first, because I've been like, oh my God, I want to respond to mi hermana, Dr. Akbar. I want to mi otra hermana, Nelba, who, by the way, I'm so glad we're finally connecting. Which is, I have a chronically ill twin sister, who's here in Waterbury. And without the same experience that you had, I've had. And to me, that's the thing that really gets under my skin, is that I could talk to someone who looks like me from 60 years ago and they can say, oh, I've experienced that. And the fact that I'm still experiencing it, that so many of us have these common traumas that we experience, is what irritates me, because it's sort of like the common question, which is what I started with, is we've constantly deciding who gets to live and who gets to die. We know who gets to die all the time. And we've decided, when we were talking about who the essential workers were, Representative Robin was saying that they're sacrificial lambs, right? We've decided whose life we valued by creating essential workers who we have ignored their humanity for forever. We didn't care about these people until we wanted to be comfortable. But when we needed our comfort, we said, guess what? You're important because you make me comfortable. And so constantly another question is, who gets to be comfortable and who does not get to be comfortable? So that also I wanted to make sure that we put into mind. And this idea of the traumas that, Dr. Akbar talked about, the complex traumas, the compound traumas, but also the vicarious trauma that we experience when, like, every time, do you know what it feels like to see my twin sister suffer for most of my life? And then to go to the hospital to ask a nurse, my sister's in a lot of pain. Can you please help her? And to have that nurse in Waterbury, St. Mary's Hospital, not even turn around to answer me, to just answer me with her back in my face. Do you know the level of disgrace one feels? The question that I ask myself as a person of color every day is, am I enough? Do I matter? How am I going to matter today? How the cognitive load for me to walk into this space and to say that my existence is now my resistance, like my existence is someone else's resistance. This is the tiredness, the racial trauma. And that's one of the things that I think is difficult when we talk about ACEs, which is that we kind of are scared to talk about the racial trauma that exists in the ground. There's blood in the soil of Connecticut. We're on stolen land with stolen labor, with blood. And you know what? We could feel that trauma, because for those of us who have indigenous, we are connected to the earth. And that trauma that's in the earth impacts us. And so I just need to say, to say that. And so what we're experiencing now is an exasperated trauma, right? All of us know that all of us know that this none of this that we're seeing right now is surprising. There've always been racial disparities. There've always been educational racial disparities, health disparities, and a lack of humanity for those of us who look like that. And I would be remiss not to say that the constant reminders on the media of our lack of humanity, the fact that you can't go running in the wrong neighborhood without the risk of dying. Do you know what that does? Every time someone sees that, that's vicarious trauma. I'm traumatized every single day. Every day I have to lick my wounds. And so I just had to respond to that, because obviously I'm alone in isolation, and you think about all those things. I have a lot of time to think. So what do we do? I don't think I have all the answers, but I can tell you what I'm doing. Like right now what I'm doing right now is focusing on my self-care, right? Because in order for me to care for others, I need to be whole. And for a very long time, I felt guilty taking care of myself. I felt selfish. And I think that was whiteness getting in my mind, making me a sacrificial lamb, that I needed to kill myself in order to please everyone. And so I think of Audre Lorde. right? I think of her quote, which is about, self-care is my self-preservation. It is my act of political warfare. When we have learned as a people, like as Black people, I don't even see my mom sit down. She's always working because it's been ingrained in our heads that we always have to be working, because if not, we're not enough. And so for me, I'm just like, Dina, you got to take care of yourself so you can take care of other people. So that's what I've been doing. And like I said earlier, helping people, offering to pay people's groceries. I'm in a privileged position. I can work from home. So what can I do for my community that's close by, my family community? Can I get you groceries? Do you want to talk? You want to see funny videos of my cat behaving like, she's like a diva, like whatever it is to make people happy. Because when we can be whole, that's kind of contagious. And then we have to shift the conversation from trauma-centered and trauma-sensitive to healing-centered, because then we're focusing on the trauma and not focusing on the healing. And we are in need of grave healing. And of course, I work where we talk about emotion regulation strategies all the time, but we need to understand that those strategies need to be culturally responsive. As a people who come from, from the African diaspora, we have healing strategies, but the ones that we tend to teach tend to be Eurocentric, right? So we need to start to see ourselves as assets. We need to start to see our community as assets, and we need to lean in so that we can move forward, seeing our worth, seeing our wholeness, and healing each other. So part of that is understanding the collective self-care, the collective healing that is so necessary for us to and that is what we have to start with us, and then we need to bridge, right? We're in need of a bridge, but we need to talk about our wounds first, because there have been wounds that have been inflicted, and we like to shy the conversation. We don't want to talk about race. Oh, God forbid you say white supremacy. Oh dear, someone feels uncomfortable. And we just need to name it, identify it, so that we can begin to solve the problems. I got really, really emotional, but we have so much to do. And we have an urgency to do something.
Thank you, Dina. I share that urgency. And just for the benefit of our Facebook Live viewers, you are watching Our Story, Our Strength, the power of truth telling and confronting trauma, COVID and beyond. Dr. Akbar, let's talk about heroes. Oftentimes we think of the hero as the person who runs into the fire. And, I see all of the heroes that are doing the work in the front lines right now. And invariably, what you see are the faces of people of color and the poor, whether it's people who are at the front lines of our medical profession, the people who are our corrections officers, even our police officers, people who are working our grocery stores to keep them open. These are, to a great degree, people of color and the poor. And at some points, it starts to feel like rather than running into the fire, our people are being thrown into the fire. So tell me about heroism.
Wow, that's such a powerful question. Almost because I think that many of us who do this work and are considered frontline, and many who I've talked to throughout this entire pandemic, don't even consider themselves heroes. Like they want to do this work because they're in it to help and to save lives and to be healers. And it's interesting, I was having a conversation with a medical resident a few days ago, and one of the things that she was telling me is that it's not being on the floor and seeing the devastation, even her own fear of contracting the disease that worries her the most. It's the idea that the reason she became a doctor was because she wanted to save lives, and for lives to be lost, minute after minute under her watch is what she can't handle and deal with. And that just speaks so much to her spirit, but the fact that in no way does she consider herself a hero. If anything, I think that healthcare workers and essential workers, all the way from the grocery stores to the gas stations, to, the cleaning folks in hospitals and all of the folks that are out there trying to make sure that we get our essentials needs met, they are contending with the idea of how do I keep going, and how do I keep my family fed, and how do I keep the lights on? And some of them thankful that they still have a job. As they look at the unemployment rates, particularly again overrepresented by Black and brown people, soaring over 25,000, and it's devastating, I think, for them to consider themselves heroes in a time where they're just surviving too. Everyone is in survival mode. And it's really interesting, something that Dina said, and something that I've been contending with that sort of like attaches to this, is that sometimes as people of color, we will work ourselves to the bone, and we will try our hardest to make sure that we're, achieving at the best that we can, doing everything that we can to make sure that we deliver. And I've been contending with this idea around white validation, because I wonder to myself sometimes, who needs to tell me that I've done enough? Who needs to tell me that I've achieved enough, that I have enough degrees, that I've had, and how often have I been in white spaces where like it wasn't until I got that validation that I felt that I was enough. And I need to deal with that myself, as we go back to your initial question about where you started, how are you feeling? This time has given me an opportunity also to reflect. Among other things, it's been a reflective time. And I think that, we've got a lot to deal with. And those sort of ideas of being heroic are often overshadowed with everything that's happening in our communities that we simply cannot control. And that's the hardest thing. It slips like through our fingers. Like we know, we have ways that we can be resilient. We have ways that we can be a village. We have ways that we can create community. And there are just so many barriers to that happening. And so often that's dismantled, and we're not allowed to exist in the very essence of who we are, so that we can create healing spaces for one another. So I think it's hard. I'll close with this. Just this past week on my podcast, I had a dear friend of mine who works in one of the Brooklyn hospitals. She's an ER social worker. And we were Brooklyn right now, New York City, the epicenter of this disease. And she was talking about how a lot of the psychiatric beds are filled now with, COVID cases. And if you're having a psychiatric condition, or if you're homeless, or even if you're just a person that typically doesn't exist from a psychiatric condition, but COVID has now exacerbated that because it's an external stressor, that they are not able to take folks in with psychiatric, conditions. And I had a moment, I've known her for over 25 years. And I had a moment at the end of the podcast where I just broke down in tears because I was so worried about her. And because I didn't want her to get exposed. And I just started, as she was talking, I just started to think about what it means that she's had to go to work single day. And then of course she started crying because I was crying. And then there was like it turned into a whole thing. But it just showed me for a minute after we finished the podcast, like that I'm like 1 inch away from like breaking down. I'm like one conversation, every moment I'm stitching myself together here to be strong. And so are all the other heroes, or people who are considered heroes in this country. Just one conversation, one more patient, one more discussion away from breaking down ourselves. That's how I see it.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar. And you can imagine, several of your parents, and you can imagine that what we're experiencing, the frustration, that feeling of helplessness and disconnect. I was on the phone with a parent the other day who was saying she was experiencing the stress through her child, who, because they don't have reliable internet service, could not connect to their schooling. And the little child not having anyone to turn to who is technologically savvy in the home, just really frustrated and upset in that moment about not having access to their education. As a clinician, Alice, what are you seeing out in the field in terms of how young people are reacting, what our kids are feeling in the home?
Thank you, Stephen. I just need to say how moved I am by everyone's stories, and thank you so much for talking about your experience. And I'm really humbled to be in this group, to really witness, to be with you on this. So thank you. And I don't know. I mean, the kids are the kids don't have adequate communication tools. They gave out Chromebooks for high school kids, but we have families with 4 or 5 kids in the house, and they have one device. They don't have smartphones, or they have bad internet connection, so they're really not able. My son has social and school avoidance, and he didn't go to school at all this year. And he got into a special ed program through Yale at the Cedarhurst. And for the first time, actually, he's been able to go to school every day because it's online. And, he's gotten all A's, and he's got outstanding student for 4 times in a row, which is, I'm not bragging on him, but I'm bragging because this alternative actually is working for him. And one of the things we talk a lot about at the clinic is sometimes some of this is working for our kids, especially the ones who are school avoidant. They can just go online and do the work and not feel that pressure. And so in some ways that's good. And other ways, I talked to Gemma. I think they have a list of 3,500 kids who are chronically absent, or that out of touch. And that's a lot of kids in New Haven. I mean, there's like 30,000 kids. So 10% of our kids are they're tracking down and trying to find, and they're doing a good job. I was just talking to a woman out of Washington State, and she's doing work in where the Paradise fires were in Butte, California. And they've had chronic fires and earthquakes and things. And what they've done in their community is they call everyone every day. They just call people and say, how you doing? What's going on? And then they pass a list of anybody who seems to be under some stress onto some case managers who can help, address the basic needs. So what if we did that? Like Dina said, you're calling your friends and showing them the cat pictures. Like, what if we did that? And what if everybody had that in their lives to be able to connect? I don't know. That's all I want to say. I'm so thankful and humbled to be here today, and appreciate what people are speaking in their truth.
Thank you, Alice. I love that you brought up the importance of empathy and connection, especially when there is so much fear, there is so much disconnect, and just being able to reach each other in simple ways is so critical. And I also love the fact that you brought up the digital divide, because so many of our young people and our families are having the shelter in place, and they don't have access to the basic tools, or at least even reliable access to those basic tools to communicate. Not to even think of our seniors who may be stuck on the 20th floor of a affordable building with an elevator that doesn't work, and no one to talk to and no one to reach out to. So I really appreciate you bringing up those points. As I want to turn to my leaders for a second, my elected people. One thing that we really are at risk of, and several of you have brought this up, is that because so few of our children are able to connect right now, and are feeling that disconnect. You spoke about the 3,000 children, Alice. There's a number that one of our other communities is experiencing 30% of children who have all but disappeared from the educational system. And it's a community that is majority children of color and the poor. So what I'm wondering is, we're at risk of losing an entire generation of children during this pandemic, and disproportionately, it's children of color. What are you thinking, Gary and Robin?
I guess I'm going first. That conversation is multi-layered for me. So there's the conversation about access, right? Whether or not Chromebooks were given to people, whether or not they have technological access, being able to actually connect to the internet once they get it, what the speed is, all of that stuff. But then there's the other part of the conversation. Right now, you have people who go to school, basically. They connect in and they go to school. The kids I know go and pick up their work the same as if they had gone and picked up a packet, and they do the work. Work is not education. Work is just simply work. And I think that's part of the problem. And it leads to something else that's not about education, but I think is overarching and it's important. Right now, what we're hearing is people talking about what COVID-19 has revealed, which, by the way, we've known, but what it has revealed. And they talk about it in a way as if that means we're going to do something. I want to remind people, I said this on the last call we had, that we watched in this country people drown on TV and we didn't do anything, right? We watched people literally drown on our TV screens and meh, that's what happened, right? There were think pieces about it. People spent some time talking about it. But as the years went on, man, what? And that's where my frustration comes in, because I think that people are living in denial. They're out there as if there's some bad person out there who's doing this, who's allowed this to happen. The problem isn't somebody else. The problem is us. We have allowed for this to happen. I am right now having conversations to the government as a government official about what is happening. And what I'm hearing back is the same thing I've always heard. And the decisions are being made now that will have implications for the rest of our lives. And you don't get to afterwards do an analysis and then say, well, we're going to fix those things. Those things are being fixed right now. I walk backwards in time. PPP. You don't get to later do an analysis of whether or not it went out and helped to uplift the community. One community's been uplifted while the other continued to drown, right? So you may do the analysis, but it doesn't change anything that happened. And this has to do with whose voices are getting heard right now inside of the pandemic, inside of the crisis. I don't want to use the word crisis because this is our norm for our communities. And a crisis is a point in time thing. So inside of what is currently happening, you have the voices you always have. And that is the reason why you have what you get out of this. I could have told you that the money wasn't going to go to Black and brown communities before we even had a conversation about it, because that's the way that the structure allows for money to be dispersed. What I want to know, because I'm very concerned about the trauma that will be transmitted to my children's generation and beyond, what I want to know is, in this moment that we are in right now, what are we going to do? And that's as much to the panel as it is to those who are listening. What are we going to do to change that? The governor has panels that are talking about what we're doing. You have seen these panels? Have you seen who actually gets to make the decisions at the end of the day? Because you have panels and then you have the people who make the decisions. They're not the same thing. And I say that as a person who's inside government, because I think it's important for people to know that we're not just all sitting there saying it's okay, because it is not okay. It is wrong, and some of it is immoral, and some of it should never happen. But that is what we're wrestling with, and that's the importance of this panel today, to ask those questions. And I want to say one more thing. While we're experiencing all that we're experiencing, the public health face in this state was a Black woman. And it isn't anymore. And I'm not going to get into the personnel issues there, but the manner in which this happened has impacts into the community itself. The way that that woman has been allowed to be looked at nationally, not just in the state of Connecticut, has impacts on the community here in Connecticut, the Black community, Black women that we, I'm the only one aside from you, Stephen, that we as people of color there are decisions that are made every day that don't seem like they impact us in terms of what we're talking about here, but that have huge impacts on our daughters, on our sons, and we have to push to have a different response from government, from organizations that say that they're there for our community, from all of the pieces that should be allowing us to move forward. And I'll stop there before I could keep going forever, but yeah, I'll stop there.
Well, Robin, as you come on, I do want to prompt everyone. We are going to ask you for your advice on what it is that we can do and what it is that we need to demand in terms of what we want to see from our leaders. And Gary, thank you for starting that part of the conversation. Robin.
Thanks, Steve. And I mean, Gary hit on quite a few critical points, I would say. And the one thing that I will say is some of it is criminal, what we're seeing go on. And I think that's a discussion that needs to be had with a plan of action and strategy to eliminate that. It's criminal. You don't get, well, you do. I say you don't get to call them essential and then treat them like they're sacrificial, but we do, right? So I think that we have to look at that and the fact that, the good senator brought up the fact that we just saw an esteemed woman of color, a Black woman who was seated in a very powerful position during a time when this country and this state in particular is struggling to make ends meet and to make sense out of this and to figure out what it is we need to be doing, because this is uncharted territory. And for her to have been removed in the fashion that she was, I think about all the little girls of color, that look in my eyes when I'm out speaking and doing community work. And I can't even describe to you how humbling that feeling is. To look in their eyes and they're looking at me like, wow, they put me on this pedestal. And I have to remind them that my story is your story. What you're going through, I've been through. In fact, I've been through some things that I hope you never have to go through. So don't let the glory fool you, because there's a story behind this, and there's nothing that we cannot do or achieve as people of color, especially Black women and brown women. So I just wanted to address that whole issue, because that was something that was and still is a sore spot, and it's very painful. I feel disrespected as a Black woman watching the way that went down. And as the senator said, it was a national, it's a national story. People all over the United States and the world is talking about that. And I really don't feel like it was handled in a fashion that it should have been, regardless to what the situation or the circumstances were that led to that. It's not what we do, it's how we do it. My grandmother used to say that all the time. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. And then I'll go back to the initial question around access and what Alice was talking about. I mean, we are in New Haven, Connecticut. It's half my district. I represent New Haven and Hampton. And we have 2,000 students in New Haven that don't have access to long distance learning. So, and we also, New Hallville is slotted for free Wi-Fi. Still waiting on that to happen. So when we talk about stay home, stay safe, long distance learning, all these things that we speak of like it's no big deal, we just gonna make it happen. We need to understand that these are things that was never happening for our children, that our children start out behind. They're already behind. No child left behind. Slap in the face, insult to injury. What we're going through with this COVID is an insult to injury. It's an insult to us as a people, to our children, to generations, to our ancestors. And I just don't, the decisions that are being made now should have been made a long time ago. So what I will say as a lawmaker and a legislator and an elected official is the push that I want us to have collectively when we get back to the State House is that the exceptions that we have made during this pandemic become the standard rule. That it's no longer the exceptions, because the things that we are doing, all of a sudden we can take homeless people and house them in hotels, right? It's all these accommodations that we're making. And I'm like, why weren't we doing this before? Why did it take a pandemic for us to address the fact that, you know, you can't say stay safe and stay home when we have children and women and some men that suffer from domestic violence? Their homes are not safe. So what are we going to do about that? And how are we going to come to their aid? And I mean, I feel like Gary and many legislators feel right now powerless because we have been taken out of the equation. And right now, this state is being led by leadership in the House and Senate and the governor's office. And the governor has the last say, and everything is being done by executive order. And when you have someone that is so removed from the experience, so removed from the suffering and the pain that's ingrained in our people for generations, Gary said it. This is why we keep getting what we get. And this is what I say to my community now that we are here, because they have been looking at us, right? And the truth of the matter is the city is waiting on the state for funding. The state is waiting on the feds for funding. And in the meantime, in between time, my people, our people are dying. Our children are hungry. Some are starving. They have nothing to do. And the mental trauma that they are experiencing on top of the physical trauma that some of them are experiencing is unacceptable, and it's inhumane. When you want to talk about humanity, we need to talk about dignity and respect, and how we have never been able to get our fair shake at any of those tables. We talk about being at the table. If you ain't at the table, you're on the menu. I'm at the table and I'm the main course. So being at the table is not enough. What we have to do as a community is create our tables and bring them to our tables instead of the way we've always been doing it. Because when you're a guest, you accept what you get. You don't go in making demands. They say power concedes nothing without a demand. My God, we've been making demands for centuries and they ain't got nothing. And what I'm saying to my people is it's time we take it by force and stop depending on a system that was designed to devour us to deliver us, because that is not going to happen. So I want to see us talk about what you said. What is it that we can do? What is it we should be doing in order to bridge that gap? And part of it for me is something that has been dropped in my spirit for over a decade now. And I've been in Connecticut 20 years this summer. And it is back to the basics, back to being a village. When I moved to the Ville, that's all I kept feeling in my spirit. And people said, oh my God, now that you know where you live, I know you're looking for somewhere else. And I'm like, nah, I'm from New York. I'm a Queens girl. I'm at home. I'm not out of place here. These are my people. Their struggle is my struggle. That experience is what I've lived my whole life. I'm going to roll my sleeves up and I'm going to do what needs to be done to help. And I think that's what I want to really expound on before we close out here tonight. What are the actionable steps that we can take to get back to the basics and back to being a village? Because when I grew up, there was no lack, and we were poor, but we didn't know that. There was no lack in the community. Because if we needed a cup of sugar, I got sent down the hall or downstairs to Miss Joyce's house. Or if my grandmother needed money till she got paid, there were always resources within our reach. And that hasn't changed. What has changed is our mindset. And I want to see us go back to dispel these myths and stop feeding into this victim mentality and the other mentalities that we have attached, that we're not good enough. We're more than enough. This country was built on our backs. It was built on the backs of our ancestors, and it's still being built on our backs. Because when we look at capitalism and the folks that are out there making it happen, I stood on the House floor for 14 hours from 10 p.m. to afternoon the next day, fighting for a $15 minimum wage. Historical debate, longest debate in this state, for $15, which is not a livable wage. And these are the very people that now we're calling essential, that we're depending on to keep this state open and running, while we all have the luxury and the liberty of sitting at home and doing teletown halls. Something's wrong with that picture. And I'm glad to be having this conversation, because I know the people at this table are going to help to make a difference in what it is that needs to be done.
Thank you, Robin. You know, I think about equitable access to all of the things that you're describing: equitable access to healing, equitable access to opportunity, equitable access to just being a family and being able to be together, especially when there's so much fear and danger in our society. You know, Nelva and Dina, in simpler times pre-COVID, you know, we were really stretching the conversation on access to the skill set of social emotional connection and healing and empowerment. Nelva through your work at CCSU and Dina through your work at Yale. And it seems to me that even if we were to wake up tomorrow and we did everything right in terms of having the right people at the table, having people of color be part of the decision making, having communities be part of the focus for a resource, there's still healing that has to happen. How do we ensure, and there are families watching, how do we ensure that children, especially children of color and the poor, have equitable access to not only the healing from a tier two, from a highly stressful situation, to being able to have access to the skills and the information to meaningful healing?
I'm not sure, Dina. Okay. I was waiting. I'm not going to have a comprehensive answer for you. I'm going to have pieces of an answer. But I know one of the things that was incredibly essential in our own experience was in the telling of the story. No one would have had compassion for my son, for example, in our own situation, if they didn't know his story. So many children have stories like Isaiah, but because people knew the particulars of Isaiah's story, they were able to have that connection. So part of this journey for me, and it's interesting, this week I just read for the first time part of writing that I wrote, telling the story of some trauma, the trauma of gun violence. Storytelling is critically important, and reminding our families that advocacy includes telling the story, that humanizing piece. And I know, I'm sorry, because it feels like it's putting more on our responsibility on the shoulders of our families, but that their stories have value, that their lives have value, and sharing that in a more systemic way. Alice said that she was able to talk to a counselor about this kid and explain why the child was running out. That too, the sharing of stories is social and emotional learning, because it reminds me and compels me to share compassion. And we're all in this together. You know, I was able in January before COVID to spend some time with Marian Wright Edelman and a group of women at Alex Haley Farm. And we were all looking at her crying, saying, "How have you stood?" And she said, "You just do." And I know that we're tired, and there are moments that you want to give up and say, "Forget this." But where are we going to go? We are here until the work is done, and we are here until we take our last, and we will continue to advocate. And if Marian Wright Edelman, in her Woman of a Certain Age, can get up and say, "Get off your butt, Nelva, like we've got work to do," then I can get up and do that work. So back to your point, I think the sharing of stories is critically important.
Thank you, Nelva.
I totally agree with the power of sharing stories and the way that it humanizes us. I have a lot of ideas, but I do think that one of the things that we need to do is lean into our power. We need to lean into our magic, and we need to lean into our enoughness. And I think in order to do that, we have to also name that whiteness is not our enoughness. Because for a lot of what Dr. Maisa was saying, this idea of like white approval, white validation, I'm going to that every single day. Why did I think I need to do this, and this in order to be seen, to be considered valuable? Why does Dr. Maisa or I have to write? Well, I have to write an email from a Yale.edu in order for my sister's doctor to respond. Right. So it's like we constantly get the messages that we have to do that because that's the only way we get response. We need to do what Representative Robin is saying, which is we need to make our own table. We can't wait to be saved. Too often we've become so used to our abuse, so used to our trauma that we've become apathetic. And we think we just like, this is the way it is. This is just what our norm is, and we have to envision a better norm, a different normal, and one with hope, one with our magic, one with our collective beautifulness, our connected enoughness. We need to have healing circles, because in telling our stories, we can heal. So we need to have our healing circles in our communities. And then we need to make some demands, because the way the state is funded, like the whole idea is that inequity happens by design. We need to start saying, you know what? There needs to be a stop. There needs to be a stoplight over there, because people keep getting hit by cars, or our schools need to be funded differently. So we need to just start making some demands, but we need like a concerted effort, our collective, a focus on our healing. And we need to think about what equity actually means. Equity means redistributing resources, which means those people who have really need to ask themselves, what are you willing to give up? So folks need to give up some stuff. And that's why we haven't gotten equity, because we are in a society that believes in meritocracy. Oh, I got here because I worked hard. But inequity happened by design. You got there because you were set to go there. I am where I am. I had to fight to open the door. So how do we begin to ask ourselves the questions, and this idea of human goodness and collective goodness? What do I need to do in order to ensure that others who don't have? And that's just the moral question that we need to ask is, what am I willing to give up, and what are you willing to give up? And I just think we need to start asking that of ourselves first, and then calling people in and pushing them to reflect on that question. And not only reflect, but move from reflection and conversation to action, and then start demanding it. You gotta be up in these streets, yo. I'm from New York too. I'm from the BX, so we to go and bring that vibe and that energy and make it a literation and a revolution.
Thank you, Dina. Dr. Akbar, thank you so much for that, by the way. And Dr. Akbar, as I think about power, and as I think about how power often becomes comfortable in those who wield it because it is familiar, and those who are around those tables at which power is wielded feels familiar. It's probably one of the most difficult things to share. Why is power important in this conversation?
Well, what people tend to separate is that privilege and power are interchangeable in this country. And we have not started to dismantle the idea that privilege is at the forefront of power. And because we don't have that type of privilege, we're not entitled to that type of privilege, we're often stripped of our power and often stripped of the capacity to be able to execute and enact change for our communities. I'm finishing up my second book now that's called Born Privileged: The Pursuit of Racial Justice. And the book is specifically talking to white allies. Because I think for so long, what's happened is that white allies have created their own doctrine around allyship. And they've shared it with one another. And then what ends up happening is that the allyship gets bastardized along the way. And instead it becomes a power play. And you tend to see this all the time in communities, who gets funded, who doesn't get funded. Dina talked about the idea of equity. Where does equity really exist? Where does access really exist? Look at what happened with the PPP loans that came out. I mean, it just is a demonstration of what happens in the world, in the nation, in communities. You've got big companies that will, suck up everything that's available, and little small businesses, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses who were locked out and have no access. And again, what COVID is doing is highlighting where the power structure really lies. And it's highlighting, because of that power, who is allowed to get access. And, I think that it's high and mighty time that we as a community, that people of color start to unite. Our communities have struggled quite a bit, again, by design, around collectively coming together, but in numbers and in thought and in passion and in collective intelligence, we are unstoppable. We just haven't tapped into that yet. And when we begin to decolonize our minds from the idea of colorism and separateness and all these labels, the census labels, am I Latina, am I not Latina, am I Afro-Latina, am I Black, am I this, am I that? And just understand that, you know, collectively, the way that we are seen to the majority group is that we're all needy and at risk and not able to do much of anything for ourselves. And that is a lie. And I'm tired of living and existing within, you know, what Enola Aird calls the twin lies of white superiority and Black inferiority. I'm ready for us as a group to unite and to tap into all of the gifts and the passions and the intelligence and everything that we can bring to not just heal ourselves, but we have every single tool that we need to also heal our people. Every single tool. So, you know, power is a very strong element to fight, but I feel that we're ready. We've been preparing for a very long time, and time's up. Time's now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akbar. You know, I really appreciate your conversation, this conversation about the familiar flow of power, because oftentimes changing the course of that flow is probably one of the most difficult things that we have to, as communities of color, have to endure. And also, just that understanding that in that disruption, there has to be, there's a taking, there is a demanding, but there also has to be a fellowship. And that fellowship comes from people who are in power understanding that they are not the only ones that should be at the table, that the table needs to be more inclusive and it needs to be more self-conscious in terms of that exclusivity. So I really appreciate you talking about that.
And Stephen, can I just add to that?
Please.
You know, like one of the things that it's funny because I was just handing the manuscript in again to the developmental editor. And one of the pieces that I added in today was saying that, you know, when you're engaging in the journey of allyship, one of the things that you, as a person who wants to be an ally, who is committing to allyship, has to consider is that sometimes they got to give up their seat in the table to give it to somebody who can actually, you know, be a representation of the community that they're going to, you know, where this change needs to be enacted. And power doesn't allow you to do that. That's how you know when you're unable to come up off that seat and say, you know what, you deserve to sit here because you deserve to have a voice and you deserve to be heard. And I can support you and I can broker this for you. Now, I'm not just going to be an accomplice. I'm not just going to be an ally or a supporter in words. I'm going to broker, I'm going to bridge this opportunity for you because I believe in what you can do and in the power in what you can do and that we can do it together. Not you in front of me, but we can do it together, right? And you leading the thought about what can happen, you leading the interventions, you leading, you know, the framework in which this is done. That's where distribution of power changes. That's when it becomes dynamic. That's when it means that like the world, you know, that equity, that justice for all idea really comes in. And I'm hoping that this is not just a commitment of something that we have to carry as people of color, but that those who claim allyship will begin to understand that their commitment lies more than just on a paper, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm not even going to go there. That's a whole nother town hall about like on paper how that looks, but that instead, like, you know, we're going to effectuate change because we really want to believe in inclusion. And the way that we believe in inclusion is by giving up some of this power.
You
So
know, it's remarkable to me that in every part of this conversation, there's an ebb and flow between what our people need and what our people need to do. And it's powerful to me that even when there is lack of access to equitable access to opportunity, we are still saying, what can we do as a community to lead within our communities to improve our own lot? And I have to tell you, it would be a nightmare for me for the government to become a service provider. It should be a pathway to empowerment of the people that it represents, not merely a service provider that provides a service to a people that need. And that is how power should be defined and power should be used. I want to leave each of you with as we come upon the hour, just with a prompt. We have several audiences. We have the people in power that we're talking about. We have families, and we have allies. So our community, our allies, and the people in power. I'd like to ask each of you to choose one of those communities or a couple, and just address them directly with a parting thought.
I will just say to our people of color, our marginalized populations, that you are enough and you are powerful, and together we are even more powerful. And that let's no longer ask for equity, let's ask for liberation, and let's fight for it.
Thank you, Dina. Alice?
I would say to our allies and to myself is that Anola words that Maisa said are, let us defy the lie of white superiority. And that is the job that we have to do, is defy that lie. And like you said, give up the seat. And I'm very appreciative of your words.
Thank you, Alice. Nelva?
I would go back to the concept of heroism, which you talked about or you brought up earlier. A hero is someone who runs into a building sometimes, but a hero can also be the person who sits outside and says, I'm not going in there because I want to know why these buildings keep being set on fire. Another thing is that we sometimes use heroism as absolution. If I can nominate someone else a hero, then I don't have to take responsibility or take the dirty job of doing that. So if there are folks out there, we've decided to ring bells in our communities, our beautiful communities where no one's an essential worker, it's great to ring the bells, but also vote for policies and systems that will really honor people, because the bell ringing is lovely. I don't mean to make light of it, but it's not enough to save lives. Yes, that's what I would say.
Thank you, Nelva. Dr. Akbar?
I think to my communities of color, I would say, let's tap into our rhythm. Everything we do has a rhythm, has a beat, has a tone. Let's tap into our rhythm. Let's be eternally connected to our ancestors. Let's make sure that we stay and remain connected to one another. And let's focus with laser intensity on what our future can hold together. We're ready. Time's up. Just gonna keep saying it.
Thank you. Robin?
Ooh, sometimes you just have a really good meal and you just get so full, you just want to go to sleep. I'm about comatose right now. This has been really, really phenomenal. Thank you so much, each and every one of you. Thank you. You bought it. We have more to bring. What I will say to my community is, I love you. I'm here for you. I want us to be here for one another. I believe that there is not anything under the sun that we cannot do that we have not already done. Let's get back to the basics. Let's get back to being a village. We are a royal priesthood. Let's act like it. Let's be there for one another and get back to loving and caring and having genuine concern for one another. Let's get back to, let's put the neighbor back in hood. We've allowed this system that is not broken to define who we are and how we operate. And I say it's time that we dismantle that. Dr. Akbar, you are absolutely right. We are not only ready, we were born ready. Out of the birth canal, we came ready because we knew what we were up against. So that is what I will leave with my community. We got this. Everything we need to succeed, everything that our children need to succeed, we already have it. We were birthed, we came here with it. And let's take this opportunity to redefine our mindset. Let's take this opportunity to redefine who we are, what we want, what we deserve, and how we're going to go out there and get it. Because with all due respect, the good senator and I and many of our colleagues have been making demands for months now. What is it, Gary? Almost 3 months now? And yeah, it's time to take it by force because that's what they did. I want my stuff back. And I'm asking my community, don't you? Because if you do, then let's get it done. Thank you.
So I guess I'm the only one left. So I want to say that words have power. And when we call the people who a few months ago were struggling, as Robin said, to get $15 an hour, who were struggling to make it day to day heroes, we should actually act like it. And I also want to just make a commentary on power because I think that one of the tricks that has been played on us is to convince us that power is not a thing that we want because power corrupt us. The people who are making decisions have power. People who do the wrong things by our community have power. And so we need to be concerned with actually accessing power because that is how you actually make things happen. In a state house, I want to remind us, we sit in a state that has never had a Black governor, has never had a Black leader of the House, has never had a Black leader of the Senate. That's why you see what you see. The state also has people who are elected who have children who don't come behind them and fill seats like white communities do. We don't have power. We don't send it down through generations. And so I want people to understand that I grew up in the Bronx in a housing project with a single mother and a drug addict father. And I had child sex abuse and everything that we talk about. And I sit here. And so there's no reason why any of the people watching can't sit here. They all can. And so I want them to understand that you can be doing exactly what I'm doing despite the trauma that you have lived through, despite the dirt that has been thrown on top of you. You can sit here too. And so don't be afraid of power. And then I just want to thank everybody for being a part of this panel. And I want to thank Stephen and the commission for continuing to support this effort because this whole thing is submitted to the community in love. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you so much. I want to take this opportunity to just thank each of you for your bravery, your candor, and your spirit, really, of goodwill, not only toward each other, but also to the communities that we all represent, and really your goodwill ultimately toward the state of Connecticut. You know, we are better and we are bolder together. And I think if we can all just really let that sink in so that we see more of us at the tables where decisions are being made. We see more of us at the tables where nourishment is being had. We see more of us at the tables where we are sheltered and secure and thriving. That is our goal. And for that, for your words, for your wisdom, and for your leadership in getting toward that goal, I thank you. Have a good night.
Love you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Yeah.